The number you have dialed is not in service at this time.
Welcome to Spotlight on the Arts. I'm Patrick Cristiano, your host, the publisher of TheaterLife.com, a website for theater buffs in New York City and the Hamptons, and we are coming to you from the LTV studio in Wainscott. I have a special guest today, my friend Julia Motyka. Julia, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and talk with me today.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Julia is an actress and a writer and a producer and a multi-talented individual. So Julia, she's acted on Broadway, off Broadway. You've been on second stage, roundabout, primary stages, ensemble, Mambu Mimes, and lots of other places.
Yeah, all around the country,
all
really.
Around the country, and you performed at Bay Street Theater and Lynn Nottage's Intimate Apparel.
I have,
saw
indeed.
You. It was wonderful.
It was a really fun show to be a part of. Extraordinary.
And you have a project that you've been working on, kind of an autobiographical project that you.
Yeah, I mean, it started, about 5.5, 6 years ago. I started having these dreams about a little girl, and I would wake up. I would never remember the dream, but I would always wake up and feel the imprint of a tiny body on my body. And the little girl always had dark curly hair. She always had blue eyes, and her name was Esme in the dream. And I had been of the persuasion that I was never going to have biological kids. Didn't interest me. I didn't need to do it. There had been factors in my life that suggested maybe not. And I started having these dreams. And one night, I had a dream again.
How long ago?
And it started at the beginning of 2013, end of 2012, beginning of 2013.
And when did you have your child is a year old?
She's 2 years old now. So for several years I had these dreams. And then about 2 years into the dreams, I had one final dream of her. And she stayed with me all day long. It was like this little kind of passenger with me all day. And at the end of the day, she just vanished. And I felt this enormous space of regret kind of open up before me. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? I think I may want to become a mother. And I was shocked by it. And really,
why were you shocked by it?
Because it had never been something that I had felt an urge to do.
Okay,
And in my family, there is a pretty profound history of mental illness.
Oh, okay.
And so I thought, maybe not. Maybe I would give that a rest. And so in order to decide what to do.
So all your life you would carry this thing that I probably won't have children.
Yeah, I probably won't have
so
children.
I get it.
I take my father has been ill since I was 18 years old. I take care of him. I just I felt like I'd taken care of enough people. And I also felt like maybe our genetic line was allowed to be ending. Maybe it was time for that to be the end of our story. And this little spirit kept kind of calling my name. And so in order to better understand what to do about this kind of new urge, I started to interview all of the still living members of my family to talk about mental health. There's a bunch of suicide. There are all of these complicated pieces of our past that, like many families, we kept very silent. And it occurred to me very early on that I wanted to turn it into a theater piece, because that's what I am, right? I'm an animal of the theater. And so I received a couple of different residencies, one through a wonderful organization called Space on Ryder Farm. Another, I got a fellowship to go work in Portugal for 6 weeks that following year, and continued to write, and really started to shape this piece of theater, which was then titled How to Escape a Sinking Ship. And hard on the heels of that, discovered.
But when you originally did it, it was a one-person show.
It was. I workshopped it as a solo show.
And the name again was what?
It was How to Escape a Sinking Ship.
Okay.
And it was really about redefining your own narrative in the face of an overwhelming past, and how to claim your life.
Which you did.
Which I did do,
right.
Because lo and behold, in the fall of 2016, after it was discovered that I had severe endometriosis and some pretty profound fertility issues, I wound up kind of excising all of these these problems, literally, surgically, from my body, and became pregnant very quickly with a little girl who does have dark hair and does have blue eyes.
That is too
and
mind-boggling.
who arrived. I had thought that spirit was a harbinger. I thought it was just a dream, but she came out, and there she was, Esme, and. So obviously that was what we named her, and she has been exactly who I dreamed about and more. Once she was born, I realized that the story had changed, that it wasn't just about the decision to have the child. It was then about overcoming the obstacle of fertility. It felt like, in some ways it felt like the women of my past had kind of come in and blocked all of my fertility centers in order to keep me from having a kid, if we want to get super metaphysical about it. And so I then had a surgery and then became pregnant easily. But I realized that there were these areas that we as women don't really talk about. We don't really talk about fertility and infertility in a meaningful way yet. We still have trouble talking about mental illness. And we have trouble talking about motherhood in all of its facets. And I realized that outside of writing a solo show, I could lend my voice to a book that maybe started to broach those three topics through the lens of my own life.
And the title has changed. I love the title.
The title has changed now to Life by a Thousand Paper
I
Cuts.
love the title. It's very evocative
Thank you.
of images.
I'm so glad. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the hope. Yeah.
So now you go someplace to do this? Do you do this?
Do I write? I mean, right
I
now.
thought you were doing a workshop. Am I wrong?
I did years ago. I did.
No, I thought you did something recently in Southampton related to this piece. Maybe
Oh, I
I'm
did.
wrong.
I went to the Writers' Conference.
Oh, so
I was
did-
a participant at the Southampton Writers' Conference and had a wonderful time. I worked with really the inimitable Roger Rosenblatt in a memoir workshop and spent a week with him and I think 12 or 13 other cohorts who were all in the practice of writing different parts of their story.
What did you discover working with him in that workshop that advanced your process here on this particular piece?
You know, Roger's such an interesting man. He and I sort of couldn't find a person who writes more differently than I do in a certain way, in a positive way. And so for me, entering into a workshop space in which the person at the helm has a different approach to how they write and to the way that they communicate was incredibly instructive. But from a much more practical perspective, he gave us an assignment, which was, in advance of the first workshop, we had to write 3 250-word pieces. One on the house in which we grew up, one on a family member that need not be living, and one on how to do something,
So
or the way something works.
On the house you grew up in.
House you
family
grew up
member,
in, yeah.
Doesn't have to be a living person. And what was the third
How
one?
to do something,
How to
or
do
how the way
something.
something works. And you had only 250 words to accomplish it. And it had to be a discrete piece of material
With a
that
beginning,
had...
middle, and end?
Exactly. And I think I have a tendency, as I think many writers do, to meander as I write. And an exercise like that forces you to be so specific with what you want to say and how you choose to say it. And so you can't be wishy-washy about your point of view. You can't be wishy-washy about the focus of your piece. You have to get right to it, and it has to be clear. And I've been using it as a litmus test for my own writing now after the workshop, in a way.
Do you overwrite and then try to get it down?
Yeah, I mean, you just sort of write. I think, for me, the initial process is just like spill it. Just get everything out on the page and then shape and cut and cull and realize that this one sentence contains something in it that you were trying to get to with all those other sentences, and that those sentences can disappear and will somehow be contained in this 10 words. But you can only get to that 10 words by writing 150 others or 250 others, So,
I'm a self-taught writer,
Yeah, me
so
too.
I understand where you're, and I do a little bit of that too.
That's cool. Yeah. Yeah.
No, and I don't want to talk about me, I want to talk about you.
No, well, I'm always curious about
Yeah.
you, so, yeah.
So you also said there was something else besides, by getting to the point, you said you learned something else right away from him.
I think there is something really awesome in working with someone who works differently from you. And Roger is a very poetic writer, certainly there's a lot of really interesting poetic device used in his writing, but there's a for lack of a better word, there's a masculinity to his writing. And my writing tends to be lyric and kind of gentle, and it kind of slides between forms. There's a lot of poetry in what I write. There's a lot of kind of jumping around in time. My writing tends to ask a lot of the reader in terms of putting together a puzzle as they read. And his does not, in a really wonderful way. And one of the things that I learned, in addition, it's probably related to the specificity of these 250-word exercises, is that sometimes the best way to say something is the simplest way to say something, you know? And that was very meaningful to me. It has been very useful.
That's something I discovered too, in my process of kind of doing things that less was more all the time.
Yeah, I think so.
And how,
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Well,
you also gave me a chapter, Knock Knock. Is it a chapter? Is it a segment? What is it?
Right now it's a piece of a chapter. It's not quite the whole chapter, but it does stand alone as an essay. Yeah, as well.
It was beautiful.
Thank
it was really well written, and I loved the ending where you had two poems side by side.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
one was like in 2016, and then one was 1962, was it?
The one on the right-hand side is actually the suicide notes that my grandmother wrote.
Right.
And the one on the other side is my note to her now.
Let's tell them what the story's about, because you said the suicide note that my grandmother
I know,
wrote. No one knows what the
I like spoiler alert.
Do you want to tell them what it's about a little bit?
Of course. Well, the piece itself is the two times in my life, one at the age of 20 and one most recently this past spring in 2018, in which I read my grandmother's suicide notes. My mother's mother struggled very seriously with mental illness. She was bipolar at a time when that wasn't really something that was well understood, and was institutionalized a number of times in the 50s. And in Chicago, and then ultimately took her own life on her second child's 10th birthday. And it loomed over our family in a very profound way. I mean, initially it loomed over our family.
How old was she?
She was 37. So she's...
And her older child was how old?
My mother was her oldest child, and my mom was 13.
So your mother was 13.
My mom was 13.
Her sister was 10.
And they have a younger brother who was 8 at the time. And so it was one of the things that I thought a lot about when I was considering whether or not to have a child. My own mother had some pretty deep struggles with her own depressions and anxieties, and ultimately did not succumb to those things, and is a tremendous human being and a very meaningful part of my life, certainly, and many others. But I know I watched her struggle as well as a child, and I think I was so afraid that I would not be able to stay, that I would emotionally, psychologically abandon my kid. That was a big fear of mine, because it was such a part of the fabric of our story. And so I wrote Knock Knock to try to explore what it's like to welcome in the darkness that you're afraid of. You know, my grandmother, Marjorie is her name, and I...
The suicide note was so moving, so clear, so specific, and it also was, as selfish as the act was, there was a generosity to it, wasn't there, to that note?
I mean, I think that her, one of the things that my mother has said, and that a number of people have said about my grandmother, is that she was unmatched in her kindness. And in her love, and that she was tormented and deeply ill, but that even in that illness there was tremendous gentleness, tremendous kindness. And
you're talking about she was a bipolar.
Yeah,
I mean, and people that are bipolar have those extremes.
Yeah.
I mean, they can be very special kind.
Of course. I mean, I think with bipolar disorder, certainly bipolar 1, which is presumably what my grandmother suffered from, there are so many different ways that it can manifest, and it can be there can be psychosis, there can be certainly manias, but those manias can manifest in different ways. Depression can masquerade as mania. The manias can be anxieties. I mean, it's a hard disease to pin down. And certainly, I think there is a myth that when a person is mentally ill, they are not a good person, that something is wrong with them.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is
that's true.
some of the greatest people have been mentally ill. Some of the most kind, the most loving, the most extraordinary have struggled with mental illness. And I think one of the things that was so moving to me about reading her notes was that there was not an act of kindness exactly, but that there was that she was, as misguided as that was, trying to
Well, I called it kindness because she
peace.
wanted to be, because she was so truthful.
Yeah.
In her note.
Yeah.
And I mean,
Yeah.
to me, that's one of the most kindest things you can offer people is the truth.
I think so too. Yeah, I think so too, for sure.
Because there are so many people, and especially today,
Yeah.
we're rampant with
Oh my gosh.
lies.
Oh my
like,
God, it's terrifying.
unbelievable.
It's terrifying.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
to reveal who you truthfully are to another human being.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let
And I think especially when there is the stigma of shame and guilt around who that person is. And that can come from mental illness, that can come from so many different places. That kind of the incredible vulnerability in saying, this is me, and I am sorry I am not different, and I am also not sorry I am not different. Here I am. And that can be the end of the sentence.
When did, growing up, when did this become revealed to you about your grandmother? I mean, how long was this, this must have been like
I didn't know. I want to say I was probably about 9 when I was told that my grandmother took her own life. And I wasn't...
But didn't you have, the little piece I read, Knock Knock, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't you have a feeling about it, though? There was something going on already? So there was subliminal stuff you were getting, right?
Absence can be a presence all its own. And, every mother has a mother. My mother had one. And just because she wasn't discussed doesn't mean she wasn't felt in our home.
Mm-hmm,
Her absence was felt profoundly, I think, in our home, even before we had words to name that absence. And I think I knew that she had existed, and I knew her name when I was about 7. I knew that she had died and how she died when I was about 9, and I didn't see a picture of her face till I was about 11. But even beyond those sort of pinpricks of time, she was with us. She was somehow in the fabric of our home, in the fabric of our lives, very deeply, very deeply. Yeah.
You're so articulate.
Every now and then.
No, you won't.
Every now and then.
I remember when they did the Bay Street Summer Gala, when your father-in-law, Stephen, came.
Yeah.
And what was the theme? There was a really interesting theme.
Was it the Prince of Egypt year?
Yes.
Yeah.
What was the theme?
Believe, when you believe. Yeah.
And I interviewed, we spoke, we spoke briefly, and I still had this thing. You were so articulate about talking about stories. Do you remember speaking about this?
I don't, but I'm thrilled.
Everybody has a story to tell. And it's only through storytelling that all these things are released.
Yeah.
I was so taken with you that, and on this, it's a little 7-minute thing, and everyone was really good, but you stood out.
Oh, well now you're going to make me blush. That's kind. Well, we are storytelling creatures, right? Like we are, so far as we know, the only narrative builders on earth. We are the ones that have to tell the stories in order to survive. We have to create the beginning, middle, and end of our lives, and we have to find the language to communicate them. However we choose to do that. It's a neat thing.
And do you think after you write this book and finish it, and do you think this will be an exercise of some kind of demons in a way that'll take you to another level where you might be able to perform it again?
Gosh,
Or do you think that you're so far away from that now that this will be the end of this story?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I think that I feel like I am open to this journey leading me where it is meant to. And I think, at the moment...
It's like you don't have any other choice in a way, is what I was going to say. Because to get this imagery in a dream, and then have the physical manifestation come through your body.
Yeah, it was a pretty intense thing.
It's like, oh wow, you have to, you
Yeah.
kind of have to go with it, don't you?
Well, and to write, you know, there's something about, you know, I think I've spent a lot of my adult life shying away from notions of magic in the world for various reasons. But I think that
Well,
there
give
is
me
a
one.
Notions of magic. Like
Why
I
you
grew
shy
up,
away from them? Yes.
Oh gosh.
These are for various reasons, because so many people run to them.
You know, I think, you know, I was raised by, you know, both of my parents are very interesting people, and my father is a deep believer in magic, and also a very complicated human being. And he taught us that if there was a feather in our path, an angel was guiding us. And he taught us that there were signs everywhere and to be looking for them. And he taught us to believe that we were kind of another, not a species exactly, but there was something other in us that was destined to come out. There was a lot of that kind of conversation. And, you know, my father has been intermittently struggling with HIV and AIDS since I was 18 years old, and I've been his primary source of care, and that care has required different forms of intervention over the years, and I think there was a razor's edge, and is a razor's edge, on which he chooses to live that I found very painful, and I started to associate magic with
The razor's
that.
edge.
And so I kind of decided to tether myself very squarely to the earth. And it's really been since having Esme, since having my daughter 2 years ago, that I began to think that there might be a magic to this world that didn't require pain in the same way. So.
Yeah, I think it's kind of pretty profound that apparent that it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's your story, just as a
I think hopefully it's an interesting one, and even more hopefully it's a useful one. You know?
Yes, yeah. You know, I think it will be, and I can't wait to read more of it.
Thank you.
You know, something else I wanted to talk about,
Yeah.
because this season you worked on the Bay Street intern
Yeah.
program, and we have a little bit of time left. I thought we could talk about
Absolutely.
some of the things that you might have done, because I think a
Yeah.
lot of people don't even know you
Yeah.
can go over to Bay Street and do all the things that you have available.
It's an amazing theater, you know, and for
To
those who
education.
don't know, I am married to the artistic director, so I am a biased voice in their favor. But I really do believe they're doing some extraordinary things, and the education department has been growing by leaps and bounds. For about 9 months, when Scott took over the theater, I helped with a bunch of their education initiatives, and this past summer, for the season that's just now finishing, helped them to get a new piece of their internship program off the ground. And basically, Bay Street has had a wonderful internship program in technical theater, the aspects of design, and in the art of administration in a nonprofit theater. But there was not a performative aspect to the internship program. And Scott and I and a number of other members of the theater staff had long been lamenting that, because there's such an opportunity for young people to engage with the theater. And so Scott and Will Pomerantz, who was my kind of co-coordinator this year, and again, other members
And
of
the
the
director
staff,
of the Vita, which was fantastic.
which is amazing.
Everybody,
Yeah,
see
go
it,
see Vita.
Yeah.
It's
It's
so
been
good.
extended through, what do you know the date?
Through Labor Day weekend.
Through Labor Day
Yeah.
weekend.
And definitely go. It's extraordinary. Even if you don't like musicals, go. And so this year, there was a fleggling artistic internship cohort, and there were 4 acting apprentices and 1 directing apprentice. And those 4 acting apprentices, along with under the helm of the director, put together a play. They did a play called Obamaology, which had 4 public performances, and the rest of the intern cohort designed the costumes, the set, the light, the sound. They did the graphic design, they did the marketing, they produced it. There was an intern stage manager. It was a completely intern-led, managed, produced, and performed production. And it was outstanding. And so I was basically their cruise director. I basically just made sure that nobody set the building on fire and that everyone was happy and settled, along with Will, obviously. And together we just helped gently send this off the ground, and it's amazing. It's amazing to see what the next generation of theater artists is going to be capable
So will
of.
they do this every year now?
This is the first of many. Yeah, absolutely.
And Scott was here. You know, people probably didn't even realize the connection that Julia is Scott Schwartz, the artistic director of Bay Street Theater. She's his wife, and Edme, who she's talking about, as their child.
Yes.
And Scott has done incredible things at Bay Street.
Yeah.
It's just fabulous
Yeah,
what's
pretty
happening. And I think he's come up with something quite extraordinary with the musicals about
Yeah.
bringing large-scale musicals into this small space and,
Yeah.
and having a signature
Yeah.
look that
Yeah.
is phenomenal.
It's a really cool thing.
Yes,
it's a really cool thing, and it's both it's kind of both invites people into the small kind of magical space that is Bay Street under the auspices of these grand gestures of these big musicals, and that's a very cool combination of things to have happen.
But I didn't think they could top themselves with My Fair Lady.
I know, but they have.
Well, they've equaled. I don't know if one's better than the other. I don't
true.
think
They're very different.
They're both
They're very
different and
yeah.
equally wonderful
Yeah.
is what it is.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
So are you going to be performing there at Bay Street anytime soon?
You know, one day I suspect so. You know, Scott and I keep our hats very separate around his work there, and so I have no idea what he's planning for future seasons. But yeah, when the right opportunity arises, of course. I love Bay Street, and it's you know, it's certainly my family home, and now it's an artistic home for me as well, and that's been such a great thing.
Scott's turned it into something really extraordinary now. I mean, it always was wonderful, but now it's reached a new plateau.
Totally.
And
Totally,
yeah.
totally. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, absolutely.
So we're almost out of time.
Yeah.
You know, as you progress with this, you'll have to come back and talk.
Oh, I would love
talk
it.
about the next step where you get to
I would love it. I'm really
'Cause
excited
I like
about
to
it.
focus on process.
Yeah, the process is
And
important.
it's all process.
Well, process is everything, right? If you can't love the process, the result doesn't matter.
You're stuck.
You know? Yeah, truly. It's been such a pleasure. I'm so grateful to get to talk with you.
Yeah.
It's always so fun. Yeah.